By my watch, it is 11 o'clock,
That's
and that puts us on track for the next presentation before we break for lunch. This is an exciting presentation. We're really fortunate to have the speaker that we have. Nicole Ragland from Nevada County is going to be conducting an interview with Yinnon Hiller, who was a conscientious objector in Israel. And the interviewer and Yinnon will go through that story and its importance. So, is Nicole?
We're both on. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We're
okay?
both on.
Okay, take it away.
Hey, Yinnon.
Hi, Nicole.
Okay, so James gave a great intro. Yinnon was the first young Israeli to appeal to the Israeli High Court for his human right not to serve in the military on the grounds of his pacifist beliefs. We're going to discuss his positions as a conscientious objector and the importance of the ruling that actually was not given, but they were about to rule in his favor. So let's start with the first question. The Israeli Defense Forces, once 40,000 troops, rose to over 500,000 in 2007, and now has evolved to roughly 3 million men and women, many of whom now hail from countries as diverse as Ethiopia, Argentina, and the former Soviet Union. The IDF's activities have changed from Arab states that are no longer on the brink of war with Israel, and the bulk of their resources are now spent on the occupied territories. Yinnon, what did being a conscientious objector mean to you at ages 16, 21, and now today with a family and children of your own?
So I don't know if it changed much as as I aged. When I was 16, and even before that, my first big political issue that kind of shaped my political view in life was the first Intifada. I was a child. I saw it on TV. And it was very clear to me from a very young age that what Israel is doing or the occupation of Palestine was wrong. So that kind of shaped my political view up to this age. So for me, it was really clear from a very young age that I will not be serving in the Israeli military. And what it meant to me is, well, socially, it was kind of difficult. It did cause a lot of issues as I became a teenager and everybody was gearing towards military service. And I was the only one who didn't in my circle. But I felt like it was I didn't even feel like it was a sacrifice of any sort. It felt like I had to be true to my conscience. I had to keep true to what I thought was right. And this is, now that I have kids, I realize how much work my parents put in to instill these kind of ideas in my head, and I try to follow that. So try to point out where injustices happen and what would be a more constructive way of thinking about it into resolving these kind of injustices. I can't
You're
hear you,
mute, Nicole.
Sorry, everybody. It is important to instill those values in our children, whether it be through our words or through our actions, and not even our own children, just the children around us that we come across in our daily lives. So Profile 21 is a colloquial reference to having or faking a psychological disorder for exemption from service. Was it always clear to you to be a conscientious objector? Or did you ever consider to get off on a Profile 21 exemption? Why or why not was it a consideration?
Yeah, so I always knew I'm going to be an objector, but I didn't know that I'm going to be a conscientious objector. I didn't even know that that was a possibility till I was started exploring what my options are. Um, at the time I did it, there weren't so many people who like signed letters and refused as a group like there are now. Every few years, a group like that comes up. So I didn't really know what my options were. And as I started talking to my parents, who were very supportive, especially my mom, and we started reaching out to people who support people who object to serving in the military, that option of becoming a conscientious objector came up. And a guy who was in the process of refusing to do his um, he didn't he served already, but he was doing reserves, and he was about to refuse to go to the reserve. Said, "I feel like you're like a classic case, and this is like you are the one who can, with your story, with how early you started, you can approach the army and really take advantage of this status that exists on paper, but yet nobody ever got to do it." So we started exploring that, and as we started exploring that avenue, and my mom got very involved, her biggest fear was for me to spend 3 years in and out of the military prison for my refusal. She didn't want me to go through that, and my promise to her was that if I'm taking this avenue, I'm gonna do the best I can to avoid going to prison, even though we always knew that might be an option. So through this process, it was really long. It started when I was 16. It ended when I was almost 21. And through that, there were a couple moments that I definitely thought to myself, why did I take this really long and difficult route through all this? And I could have a much easier way would have been to go and fake psychological issues and get profile 21. It didn't feel right though, just for the same reason as a lot of other things. My goal was to be really honest with myself and take the path that was right for me, and seemed and without like trying to embellish and lie about things. So this is why I ended up. Plus, I had a ton of support. These people really like. Once we got to know each other and we started to talk, they were really excited, and that kind of motivated me to keep going, even when it was really difficult. So that's the reason why I chose to do what I chose to do. Not There's no absolutely no criticism of people who choose to leave the Israeli military or not serve for any reason. Any reason is good, but that is the reason why I chose to do what go the conscientious objector route, and that's how it ended up at the Supreme Court, the Israeli Supreme Court.
Uh, it's a huge stance to take as a teenager. Most of us here in America worry about pimples, prom, our hair, um, just, frivolous things. Um, were you mentally prepared for everything that transpired, or did some things catch you off guard? I know in the beginning you were very adamant. Were there times where you just felt like giving in?
Yeah, so I certainly was not prepared. And I don't think anybody, especially at that age, can be prepared to how cruel a system can be and how manipulative a system so big and strong like the IDF can be. My low points were definitely when I had to meet with high-ranking officer for they call it the Conscientious Objector Committee. I had to meet with them multiple times, and they kind of interview to kind of judge if you are being honest or are you just trying to get a pass serving in the military, which is kind of strange because, like we said, Profile 21 is always an option, and it's a much easier option. So during those moments, during those meetings, basically it's high-ranking officers, adults. They don't let you come in with a lawyer or even take notes. They don't keep notes, and they spend about an hour and a half to 2 hours of just berating you and abusing you, or at least that was my experience. Um, And those were my really lowest point. And leaving those meetings, it felt like it kind of I felt like I made a mistake, like it was hopeless. uh it was great that I had a lot of support to kind of lift me after those moments. I don't think a lot of people would have that kind of support. I was very fortunate as far as that goes. But yeah, there are a lot of small moments along the way that I really questioned everything I did. And I never felt like it never felt like a sacrifice. Again, I grew up very privileged because I grew up in Israel and I'm a Jew. And I grew up on stolen land. I got to see and I know the people who didn't get to stay on their land, the people who didn't get the privilege that I had, my dream childhood. So I never felt like it was a personal sacrifice, and I never like worried about it too much. And I think part of it is because I was very idealistic. But then when I met those officers, I started dealing with the military more frequently, um, I started to feel like, oh, so some of that cruelty is now turning towards me, and that's where I had like a lot of low points. Did that
It
answer it?
it sounds it did, and it's a lot of heavy stuff, a lot of real stuff, and so knowing you like I do, I know that really shaped who you are and your values and your morals. So a rough journey, but I think in the end, it was worth it. Because
I think so. I definitely feel like it
I
was worth
I
it.
think yeah, I think you're an incredible person aside from all of that.
Thanks.
So being a conscientious objector was clearly thrust upon you uh, because of circumstances and the way that the system is set up. Uh, did any of your peers take an opposite trajectory? And what do you think contributed them to doing so?
So almost all my peers took a very different trajectory. So I grew up in a kibbutz. I don't know if people know what it is, but kibbutz are like Zionist socialist communities. Traditionally, the kibbutzim, there's an ethos about it's not enough to just serve in the IDF. You kind of have it's kind of a competitive who gets the most elite assignment in the IDF. You're supposed to be a combat soldier, and the more action you see, the more respect you get. And it was from a very young age, like from kindergarten on, I would say. I remember that this has been just the culture around me. So the majority of almost all of my peers chose a different path than me and did spend the last like 2 years of high school training for the military and hoping to get the most the most elite assignment once they get drafted. And it did cause a lot of a lot of friendships. um, I lost a lot of friendship because of that. Most of the people did not understand why I'm doing what I'm doing and not choosing to take an office job in the military and not see combat. Why is the refusal to serve in the military as a whole, and it doesn't matter in which role. um, but yeah, the culture of really like serving in the military, especially for the community that I came from, was never questioned by most people. And I think the fact that I questioned it and it made them question things kind of shook them up, and a lot of people got really upset with that.
I think uncomfortable because there's so much ingraining from a young age that this is what you're supposed to do. And so anybody who veers from that path, you create a discomfort in people. So
Yeah, people don't
that's a
like to be
lot.
challenged on these things that they feel so certain about. Yeah.
So I know some of your classmates have to have been sympathetic to your plight. Why do you think none chose to join you?
Yeah, so I think there were sympathetic to me. They kind of knew me. They knew my rebellious way as a teenager. They knew I was always very vocal. I was also the only communist in school who would constantly step on a soapbox and talk to everybody about these things and why we should all be communists and start a revolution. So they knew me, so they were sympathetic to me. I had friends that really liked me, and I liked them. Even our opinions were very different, um, but I don't think they were sympathetic to my cause. I think very few of them were actually sympathetic to my cause because it really did mean that they need to reflect on what they're about to do and the path that they chose. And it really is administrating occupation is serious. It damages everybody.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for that. After being denied conscientious objector status for 5 years, in December 2000, you became the first young Israeli to appeal to the Israeli Supreme Court for your right not to serve on the grounds of your pacifist beliefs. 3 years later, before the court decision was due, the IDF officially discharged you and nullified the case. Did this feel like a victory, or did you want the Supreme Court decision? And would a decision have been too damaging to the IDF and possibly inspire future refusals to serve?
So yeah, that's a very good question. So after all that time, when that decision came or non-decision came, um, I should explain. So I had two hearings at the Supreme Court in front of a three-panel judge, and the first hearing was just the usual and as expected, just arguments. Uh, the second hearing was kind of a little more testy, and the judges pretty much said flat out that to the IDF, you guys don't want us to rule because we're going to rule in Yinnon's favor, and that was going to create a precedent. And about, I'd say, a week later, I got a letter that I was found unfit for service. They didn't want it to go to a third hearing where a decision would be made. At that point, it's been really like a long journey, and I had to put my life on hold for a long, long time, and it's really hard, especially as a teenager. So I felt a lot of relief when that came through, that I could put it behind me. It was somewhat disappointing that a decision wasn't made, and the reason why it was disappointing was less about my personal feeling because I really felt relieved. It was because of all the people who put all that hard work in. Because when you reach that point when there's a court case, you don't get to speak. It's like people take it and basically defend you and try to protect you the best they can. And they put a lot of work and put themselves in like not in the easiest spot in the world to be defending somebody like me versus the IDF. So I felt bad about that. I wish there would have been a court case. The good thing that happened is from my court case, other people could kind of create a blueprint of what is the right procedure to continue and win conscientious objector status from the IDF. And a few did, and for that I'm very grateful. I think that was a really good service for the people who refused to serve in Israel.
Um, Upon graduation or immigration into Israel, men serve 3 years in the IDF, and for women, it is 24 months, part for roles specified in law, which require a service of 36 months. All Israelis then continue to serve at least 1 month every year until their early 40s. It's hard to believe that someone with your ideology could be forced to serve in this way. For Israeli children, much like children here in the US who grow up in military families, it's clear from a young age that enlistment is in their future. As a child, what path did you envision for yourself?
So I had a hard time envisioning a path period for myself. It is very true. From a very young age, a lot of conversation, especially regarding your future service in the IDF. Kids around me and kids in Israel in general already have this idea of what they want to be. Like, I want to be a paratrooper, I want to be a pilot. And it starts, I remember it since kindergarten, right? You see the older guys come back from their on the weekend. They have their weapon with them, they have their uniform, they have their little ranks and hat on their shoulder, and everybody around me was kind of admiring these young men, and I never had that. Aspire to be um, sorry, you guys, can you hear me? I
I think
never.
you got out for a second.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
we missed a block. So
Okay, so I'm
so
saying
you
that.
ended
Yeah, I was
with
saying that my.
paratroopers and all that.
Yeah, so people, kids, even in kindergarten, started thinking of. It's kind of built into the culture. You start thinking about what you want to be when you grow up. Like what unit you want to join. What is your like? So it is so built into the culture that it is taken for granted that when you become 18, you go and join the IDF, and you try to do the best you can for your country. I never had that. My big experience, or my first exposure to Israeli soldiers, was watching those videos from the first Intifada, where 18-year-old kids beat up and break the bones of elderly people, shoot at kids. Uh, I never wanted to be that. I never wanted to be part of it. It always bothered me. It would give me nightmares as a kid. It disgusted me. So from as soon as I can remember myself, there was always this kind of schism between me and my peers when it came to nationalism and serving in the military. I was never proud to be Israeli in that regard. I always felt like there's something wrong. The occupation bothered me a lot as a kid. I thought about it a lot. Um, and the violence, just the culture of violence, was something that I never felt like I can belong to. I was always different as far as that goes. Um, so yeah, it just it really is really ingrained in children in Israel from like you learn the first like our version of scholastic books have stories about the army marching in, and so you can learn how to read and write with these stories. Our holiday songs have praise for the brave soldiers who protect us, and it just it was never me. I always felt kind of different when it came to that.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about the books and things, I think that's the fear of a lot of people on the left right now with the current administration. If they do get another 4 years, what it would do to schools and to children, and the indoctrination of religion and war and the vilified other. So totally hear you on that. In the last 3 years of high school, there is a stronger, believe it or not, psychological preparation for service. The IDF is viewed as a source of lifelong camaraderie, an essential institution of civic virtue, and the traditional wellspring of a patriotic Israeli identity. For those that refuse service, and there were many before you, and so many more that followed because of you, how does that impact their standing in Israeli society? And has that changed over the years?
Um, yeah, so I don't really know how much it changed during the years since I left Israel, which has been a while now. But growing up, even after I turned 18. So first of all, um, so sorry, I'm trying to kind of read the question again.
Uh,
So standing in Israeli
oh,
society, yeah. So while I was still living in Israel, there was definitely like jobs that were close to you, employers that would never hire you if you didn't serve in the military, or especially if you refused to serve in the military. Um, for some of us who refused, especially the ones who left on Profile 21, it was a really big ordeal to even get a driver's license. So there's a lot of small things that really kind of impede your advancement in society or acceptance in Israeli society. Um, it was a lot worse when I was young. By the time I left, there were, especially in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, in the cities, in the service industry, a lot of employers who actually preferred people who at least refuse or don't go to reserve training because they didn't want to lose their employees for 3 weeks out of the year and have to retrain people. So I think just from a capitalistic perspective, things changed a little bit, but it didn't. I don't think it changed because of morals, because the morals changed. It changed because of money, um, and I think that is what mostly changed around in Israel. Uh, if the if there was a change in like the moral stance, then we wouldn't see that big support and push to, to get yeshiva boys, the Hasidic, to join the IDF. Uh, the idea that everybody should serve and everybody should join the same burden of occupation or occupying is still really strong in Israel.
so what's interesting is that capitalism trumps patriotism, I guess, in a lot of ways. That
Yeah.
we should make note of that in our movements and our pushes against what's going on here. Um, I know that you believe uh, that a Palestinian state should exist. And I also know that you believe that that's not your call, what it should look like. But what should it look like? Not you per se, but what would be something that would empower the Palestinian people and keep them safe? Uh, is it a coexistence? Is it just a Palestinian state?
So yeah, I'm very careful not to try not to speak for Palestinians and what should be the solution. I think the solution should definitely come from what the Palestinian society feels is just. But at least at the very least, while Israel is still exists and we're working on having a Palestinian state and whatever that's going to look like is up to them. I think the right of return for Palestinians is a must. I think basically the decolonization of Palestine is a must. They must have their land back. They must have their rights back. At the very least, equal rights. Uh, at some point, we were going to have to talk reparations. But yeah, I'm really careful not to speak about how the state itself and the coexistent would look, because that is a process that would have to be driven by Palestinians. If they're open to something like what happened in South Africa, great. If they're not, that's their choice also. They really deserve all the decision making in that process, as far as I'm concerned. Uh, how it would look and how to deal with the fact that there's almost 8 million Israelis who spent, you know, a lot into this colonialist project. I'm not sure. I don't know. But I think at the very least, the positions of Palestinians in society, their rights to vote, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, even generational ones, should be accepted and acknowledged by everybody.
It's so parallel to what's been going on here for hundreds of years with the indigenous people and land
Yeah.
back. Um, so last question, and then we'll take questions from the assembly. From the outside, one might say your mother's journey, though very parallel to yours, was
Mhm.
also her personal fight. Uh, so we all want to protect and support our children. In doing so, we have to make choices that impact our own lives. How did your choices impact your mother's life? Has she ever voiced regrets about how some of the things unfolded?
So she never voiced regrets about it, and I think she's very proud of what she did. So I have three younger brothers. None of us served. I think she's very proud of the fact that all four of her boys refused to serve in the military. Her journey was took a lot of sacrifice from her. As soon as I kind of came out with like we need to prepare for the fact that I'm not going to serve and they're going to ask me to serve and I'm 16 and it's coming. She did a lot of research. She connected with a lot of people. She helped found Israeli feminist group that they called themselves New Profile. Their goal was to demilitarize Israeli society and support people who refused. Um, and through this so she was always politically involved. During the first Intifada, she was what we called women in black. They would go out to the intersections and demonstrate against the occupation every Friday. After the peace process started, that kind of dissolved, and a lot of these women changed their direction towards withdrawing all Israeli troops from southern Lebanon, and they did that for many years. So she was always politically active, but never quite to the point of questioning the need for the IDF for the Israeli military. And so when I came with that, it kind of shook her, but she basically put it in the next gear and started to figure out what her like positions and how she can contribute. And much of it was just because of like this real need to protect her children. So she paid kind of dearly for it. Social circles like kind of shut her away. There's still people within our very small community who are still mad at her for that and still mad at us for not serving. Um, but I don't think she ever regretted it. She did make a huge sacrifice though. It took she also ended up focusing a lot on that court case or supporting me where it brought a lot of tension in our family because again it's hard when you have so many kids and everybody feels like the one of the parents focus is so like laser focused on something, but she kept telling us like this is the immediate need right now. I need to protect you, and through protecting you I can protect your brothers. And yeah, it took a lot of sacrifice on her behalf, and I couldn't have done it without it. That was really a big driving force behind all that.
Well, and it should be noted that because of you, when one of your brothers applied for exemption, they just
Yeah.
fast tracked him.
Yeah. So it kind of after at my youngest brother, his appointment was basically 5 minutes. They knew what the last name is, and at that point they just signed it and told him to go home. So yeah, I guess we were kind of famous in certain circles for a little bit.
I'm going to try to drop your last name for jury duty and see if it works.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand this over to the person handling stack, and we will have questions for about 15 minutes. Or am I doing stack?
Oh, that's okay. I can take it. We've got about, I am having a hard time with my screen here. I've got Randy Hicks and Rich Stone have signaled they're on stack. So the first one goes to Randy Hicks.
Thank you for your presentation. I have one question for you. With what have you seen with the BDS movement now that the pandemic has hit? And also, what is going on with the BDS movement as in Israel, as opposed to what's going on? You know, the Trump administration has decided to make Jerusalem the capital of Israel. Has that changed anything about what your strategy is for going on?
So BDS is, first of all, I feel like it's the least we can do to support Palestinian. It is what they ask us to do. It is, they've shifted tactics to nonviolent resistance. They're asking for international support. We don't do enough of that. Definitely not as a nation. Very few nations do enough when it comes to that. BDS is unfortunately, it's missing kind of the most important component at this point, which is the sanctions. Maybe that will come later on. But they've been working really hard. So I'm a huge supporter because this is what Palestinians are calling for. And I think we should have solidarity and support as much as we can. In Israel, I think unfortunately, in many, it gave them some fodder for their Hasbara and their purposeful confliction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. It took a lot of adjustment. What I see now is that anti-Zionists got really good at making their case, how being supportive of Palestinians against the occupation is not anti-Semitic. But it's still there's still a lot of work to be done there, and still they go and cry anti-Semitism anytime anybody criticizes Israel. And now with the last administration, especially their what Mike Pompeo just put out, they're still playing that game. It's cynical. They know exactly what they're doing, but it's important that especially for the supporters of the Palestinian struggle, to kind of cut through all that noise and be really clear about the position and really clear about their support, and making sure to be very clear that this does not count as anti-Semitism. This is it's a very different thing. I'm really encouraged by younger generations of Jews in America, especially, and their support of BDS and Palestinian solidarity. I think that's a huge change from my parents' generation, who grew up in the United States and grew up after '67 and never questioning Israel. So so to your question, I think BDS is great. I think we should do a lot more of it. I think eventually I would like to see the day where sanctions come to play. And whatever the next step for the Palestinian, I think solidarity from anybody around the world is good.
Thank you, sir.
The next one on stack is Rich Stone.
Yeah. Hi. My name is Rich. I'm from the San Francisco Green Party chapter, and I must say that my introduction into Middle Eastern politics is due to the fact that I'm a Navy. When I served on the Enterprise, we were refused a port visit to Haifa because there was some sort of military escalation between Lebanon and Israel at the time. This is in 1986, and they said that Hezbollah would have launched, or would have launched, or whatever organization, I think it was Hezbollah, would have launched an attack. So on Israel if they would allow us to visit. So it uh, that, like I said, that got me, interested in it. And being part of the San Francisco Green Party, we actually did, pass a BDS resolution in 2010, which, according to some leadership in the San Francisco Green Party, this is just a rumor, but probably a fairly verifiable one, that it caused, a sort of a decline amongst the ability, the Democratic Party's, leadership to convince the Democratic, political parties to not endorse Greens. So the thing is, BDS has really been something that's been tantamount to, the the social justice, drive of the San Francisco Green Party since 2010, despite, some of the blowback that we've gotten, so I was, and so I just, it's not really that I have much of a question as much as I want to say I appreciate that, both as a soldier, as, as an anti-war vet, excuse me, and as a, as a member of the Green Party, doing what you do, and also probably, when it comes to the BDS, I just wanted to, if you're not aware, maybe make you aware of the fact that, a journalist, by the name of Abby Martin, who works, who does this, who does a program called the Empire Files, has sued, the state of Georgia, on account of her not citing a loyalty pledge. And she, because she didn't do that, she wasn't willing to. She wasn't able to give a speech to, I think it was Georgia Southern University. So she didn't sue the university; she sued the state of Georgia, and I think that this case is probably one of the one of the keynote cases that I will, that could probably determine, well, especially the state of Georgia, maybe, might have a might have an effect on BDS, or anti-BDS, stances that other states have, like Texas and here in California. So like I said, no question. I just wanted to thank you as a as an anti-war vet and as a member of the Green Party for for being a refusenik. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for that, Rich. We've got about 7 minutes left here before we're supposed to time out. I've got Orlando Johnson.
And Eric Steck.
Orlando, unmute. Orlando, can't hear you. No, you need to turn your volume on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. Apologize. I had a very interesting question. I want to ask if you can remember between 12 to 36 months, what was your mental education environment for you and your brothers?
Can you repeat that again? I'm not sure I understood that.
Okay, from 12 weeks to 36 months, if you can remember, what was you and your brother learning environment?
So 12 weeks old?
Yeah, 12 months to 36 months.
Okay. So I grew up in a kibbutz. So what it means is I grew up in children homes. Kids my age, we all lived in one place. As soon as my mom felt like she can give up any one of us to the care of the caregiver, the ladies in the kibbutz who that was their job, we went into the baby's house. And it was a really wonderful, rich thing. Um, we slept at the baby's house or at the kid's house. We That was my upbringing till I was 11 years old.
Mm,
Um, it was There was some difficulties, especially when they would put us to bed, and if you had a
yeah.
rough time, that was a little difficult. But the benefit of that, and not everybody feels like it was a benefit. It's a mixed bag for people who grew up that way. Was when I left the children's house,
Mhm.
it was at 4 p.m. till 8:30. I had my parents undisturbed. I had all their attention. We didn't have to do laundry. We didn't have to cook because went to the dining hall, and everything was done in a collective way. So I was very nurtured. I was really fortunate. Like I had the kind of childhood that people dream about. I was outdoor all the time. I learned so many things by experience. We had, we walked to see the dairy farm. We walked to the fields to see the people work in the fields. We got to do so many things from a very very young age, and the fact that by the time that my parents were done with their 8 hours of work or however long, they could take a nap and then receive us and have all the energy and all the time to just be with us as kids. As nobody gets to live like that. It was really a privilege. And I again, the reason why I got to have that privilege is because the people who used to live on that land don't live there anymore. It's because we're there. Um, there's a reason why I got to be that privilege, and very few people get to be that privileged. But yeah, I had a very nurturing experience from a very, very young age.
The reason why I asked that question, because it shows in the value and your quality of your work and your passion.
Thank you.
Great work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Uh,
You're welcome.
Eric, you got just a few minutes. You were on stack.
Yeah. First of all, thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing what's right. And also, I wanted to speak to this issue of boycott and divestment and sanctions. California Green Party actually doesn't have a firm position in our platform right now. We did discuss putting that on the agenda this time, but just to let people know, we will put something on the agenda to have a policy on Israel. And the United States has a policy that of joining the BDS movement, and cities like San Francisco have done that. My question is, in San Francisco, we decided to just say boycott and divestment because of the type of harm that is sanctions cause in places like Iraq and Venezuela. And so if you support sanctions as well, can you say how that works practically and how you do that without harming innocent people who shouldn't be harmed?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. I should really made it clear. Israel is a giant arms dealer. People buy arms from Israel all over the world. They help develop weapons who kill a lot of people. They get a lot of support from the United States, especially to get these weapons and develop them. So I think, as far as sanctions go, that should be the first thing. Much of Israelis' budget is freed up to take care of other things because they don't have to buy weapons at full price from the United States. Um, so I think there needs to be a very, um, you know, critical thinking about what kind of sanctions. But we're not talking about Venezuela. We're not talking about Iran. We're not talking about denying bringing in medicine from a country who can't produce their own medicine. Israel is propped and supported by Western countries, and some sanctions would actually benefit the rest of humanity. And I think it's important to especially on the arm side of things, um, stopping the support from the United States to Israel, to the Israeli military, and any kind of any support, even if it's logistic, even if it's not the arms, even if it's just sharing intelligence, I think is really important. I think that is the kind of shape of sanctions that I see actually having a real impact.
Before we run completely out of time, I'm going to try and get Nora Curry. She's our last person on the stack. Go ahead, Nora.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. I am Palestinian and a member of the Green Party. And yeah, I guess Orlando's question sort of spoke to the question I had about like, why do you think, I think it's like less than 1% of Israelis actually resist in any meaningful way. And like, I've been to the protest in Belaine where, you know, there's like Israeli brothers and sisters that show up, the same ones every week, but maybe like a dozen or so. And yeah, I've just always wondered why there isn't more of a movement on the ground when it's been so clear for so long, what the reality of, you know, the colonizing, you know, state and just the militarism and the blind violence. And then also just a follow-up, like as far as Green Party's position, what would you suggest is the best approach that Greens could take, like nationally, whether it's like ending US aid to Israel or on that sanctions level more specifically, to develop a platform around that? If you could speak to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have good answers to those questions, and they're really good questions, and I wrestle with them a lot myself. For your first question, I think, well, so early Zionist thinkers did not shy from using the word colonizing. It is in the founding papers. Herzl used it constantly. Ben Gurion used it. Nobody would believe you if you said that to Israelis. They don't know that part. All of that basically once the colonial project kind of fell out of favor, it got completely erased from the national ethos of Israel. They don't see themselves as colonizers, and how to fix that and how to change that and how to make them curious about their own history and admit to their real history and not their these fairy tales that they tell themselves about being the victims of the world. I don't know how to do that. I spend my entire life arguing with people about that, and I don't have a good answer. But it is a real, I think it's a very important project of making Israelis wrestle with their history and what really brought them to that piece of land and how they, and what they did to those, like even the Nakba is considered a myth by many Israelis. They don't believe it actually happened. They still believe it's a, you know, a land with no people for people with no land. They still believe all these nonsense, even though, you know, all the writing of the early Zionists were very clear about what they're doing. They didn't, you know, they didn't mince any words there. I think that national self-delusion has really taken a hold. It is part of the education system. It is part of their, again, national myth building, making the desert bloom when they were like, again, so I grew up in a place where it was famous for watermelons, watermelons and water buffaloes. And still to this day, when we talk about the history of my kibbutz, it was barren land. There were a few Bedouins who lived there, even though that family had a cemetery with 400 grave sites in it and lived there for at least 200 years before that and lived off the land. And we still tell each other those fairy tales about how there was nobody there or barely, they didn't know what to do with the land. They barely lived there. All these kind of craziness. So I don't know what the right answer to it, but it definitely feels like there's a big re-education project that's going to be needed in order to move Israeli society to be just more humane and not as fascist. You remind me your BDS, Green Party. So I think BDS, again, I want to say, I think it's been amazing. And for example, what happened in APAC last year, and the fact that people were actually embarrassed to be in APAC is a big deal. And sure, it was a front, and we know that behind closed doors, they're very supportive of Israel, and they're going to increase the military budget that they send to Israel. But at least in public, they were embarrassed, and that is a huge shift, which made me really hopeful. I think, again, taking the cue from these Palestinian activists, like you said, in Bein, in all, like they've been doing it for so long. They chose a path, and taking the cues from them and asking them, "What would you like us to do?" is would be the most effective strategy. I would like to see all support for Israel from the United States end, all of it. Uh, that that would be my dream for the United States. I would like to see. I'd like to see the labor movement in the United States refuse to like unload cargo that comes from Israel or load up cargo that goes to Israel. I'd like to see these things all over the world. It happened in a few instances. I'd like to see it become the norm, but because without international solidarity, I think there's really like very little hope. Palestinians can't do that by themselves. They're in a position. They're the colonized, and at this point, Israel is so mighty, and they're um, they really perfected colonizing. They really perfected that occupation. That what we call the separation wall, which is not a separation wall. It's a series of walls that basically this population who's been so intertwined for so many years are now can be completely separated with one order of general. Um, yeah, they don't have the means, they don't have the power to do it on their own. And international solidarity, and especially from the working class around the world, I think is really necessary. So if to call for anything, I think that's what the Green Party should be really, really clear about. What take the cues from Palestinians and really radical solidarity is the key to do it. But I'm an Israeli. I'm not an expert, and I really wish that we would listen to Palestinians.
Well, with that, I'm going to say thank you to Yinnon Hiller for insight, inspiration, passion, and commitment, comrade. Uh, you have moved us, you have inspired us. And
Thank you,
thank you
guys.
to Nicole Ragland for doing a marvelous interview. We're going to take the break now for lunch. We'll be back at 12:30. And the facilitators will change. Just Greg Jan and Karen Nihus be on guard. You will be the facilitators for the afternoon. And just so everybody remembers, we will have the primary pieces this afternoon will be the elections with Left Unity,